In 1989, the world stood at a crossroads. The Cold War, a half-century of nuclear standoffs, proxy wars, and fear, was finally coming to an end. The Berlin Wall fell, families reunited, and a man named Mikhail Gorbachev, leader of the Soviet Union, dared to dream of peace. He took a leap of faith, trusting the United States to help build a new world. America made him a promise that could have changed everything. That promise came in 1990, in the twilight of the Soviet Union. Gorbachev sat down with U.S. Secretary of State James Baker III and German Foreign Minister Hans-Dietrich Genscher. The stakes: reuniting Germany, a divided nation at the heart of Europe, without reigniting the Cold War. Baker looked Gorbachev in the eye and said, "NATO won't expand 1 inch eastward beyond where it is now." Genscher echoed it, "We won't move eastward." It wasn't a casual remark, it was a solemn pledge. Part of the 2+4 treaty talks, etched into history and documented in the National Security Archive at George Washington University. Gorbachev believed them. He trusted Bush, Baker, and Genscher. Why wouldn't he? He was dismantling an empire, letting Eastern Europe go free, betting on a future where superpowers wouldn't clash anymore. That 1 inch promise was his lifeline, a guarantee that Russia's security wouldn't be threatened, that peace could take root. He said yes, and then as soon as he turned his back and dissolved the USSR, America betrayed him. By 1994, that promise was dust. President Bill Clinton kicked off NATO's steady march eastward, tossing aside Bush's word like it was nothing. First came Poland, Hungary, and then the Czech Republic in 1999. New NATO members right on Russia's old frontier. Russia protested, its leaders shouting into a void. The U.S. didn't care. Then in 2004, 7 more joined. The Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Romania, Bulgaria, Slovenia, and Slovakia. NATO's border crept closer to Moscow, step by deliberate step. Each move was a provocation, a tall middle finger to a Russia still staggering from the Soviet collapse. Families were rebuilding, economies crashing, and the U.S. saw weakness to exploit. But they didn't stop there. In 2008, they crossed a red line, promising NATO membership to Ukraine and Georgia, countries right on Russia's doorstep, steeped in Russian history, intimately tied to its security. This wasn't expansion anymore. It was encirclement. Who was behind this? The neocon big shots, Dick Cheney, Paul Wolfowitz, Zbigniew Brzezinski, men drunk on power after the Soviet Union fell in 1991. They saw America as the world's lone kingpin, unstoppable. Zbigniew Brzezinski spelled it all out in his 1997 book, The Grand Chessboard, saying Russia would just roll over as NATO marched east. Neutrality? That was a dirty word to them. If you weren't under America's Pax Americana boot, you were a threat. Diplomacy? Forget it. They played war games instead. Game theory, where you don't talk to the other side, you just outmaneuver them. Look up Rand Corporation's 2019 report. How do we extend Russia? How do we break it? This wasn't about safety. It was about domination. And then came the Ukraine war in 2022, a war that ripped a nation apart, a war that was totally avoidable, a war that's killed more than 1 million people already. Let that sink in for a moment. 1 million lives, Ukrainian soldiers, mothers, kids, Russian troops too. Homes flattened, streets silent, fields soaked in the blood of young men whose lives were ended for nothing. Ukraine started the fight by murdering more than 14,000 of its own Russian-speaking people in the Donbass region, all the while using its neo-Nazi Azov battalion soldiers to do so. Russia simply couldn't stand by and do nothing. Enough was enough. In fact, it was the covert meddling of the CIA and NATO and George Soros which caused the overthrow of the pro-Russian Ukrainian government that was elected in 2014. So the U.S. is actually the one guilty of lighting this fuse, not Russia. Make no mistake about it, this is an American war, fought with Ukrainian bodies, armed with American guns, and all because a small group of neocons took it upon themselves to break our nation's 1 inch promise to Russia. Listen to America's warmongering politicians cheer. Senator Blumenthal says it's wonderful that no Americans are dying. Mitt Romney calls it the best money we ever spent. 1 million dead and they're counting dollars, not graves. This isn't collateral damage. It's a slaughter that they planned. A proxy war where Ukraine's the pawn and Russia's the target. They turned a country that could have been neutral into a killing ground. Go back to 1990. Gorbachev wasn't just a leader, he was a dreamer. He gave up power to end the Cold War, believing Bush's word meant no more arms races, no more brinkmanship. He trusted America to keep NATO in check. But the neocons saw a chance to pounce. They didn't just expand NATO. They trashed the rules that kept us all safe. In 2002, they dumped the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, nuclear guardrails gone. In 2019, the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty out the window. Then they planted missiles in Poland and Romania, 7 minutes from Moscow, a first strike waiting to happen. Imagine Russia doing that in Mexico or in Ontario, Canada. The U.S. would have bombed Russia yesterday. Russia felt the noose tighten. In 2007, Putin stood up in Munich and begged, "Stop now." The U.S. smirked and kept going. In 2008, they pushed NATO to Ukraine and Georgia. William Burns, our ambassador there, warned, "Niet means niet." That too was ignored. In 2021, Putin tried one last time, sent peace drafts to the U.S. and Europe. No NATO in Ukraine. Jake Sullivan brushed it off. No war's coming. 7 days after Russia invaded, Kiev was surrounded by Russian tanks. Zelensky was ready to sign for neutrality. Russia showed good faith and backed off. The U.S. and Britain said no and sent in Boris Johnson to kill the deal. 1 million deaths later, that's the cost of their arrogance. This war is a nightmare, and it was completely avoidable. Minsk II in 2015, backed by the UN, offered peace, autonomy for Ukraine's east. The US and Ukraine trashed it. Europe just watched. Neutrality could have saved lives, kept NATO out, and kept Russia calm. Instead, the US wanted a fight. They got it. And Europe? It's paying the price for blindly following along. Europe's a casualty in this too. The Baltics, once happy and neutral, now host U.S. troops, taunting Russia with every drill. A quarter of their people speak Russian, and now they're caught in the crossfire. Ukraine's no buffer anymore. It's a war zone, its sovereignty shredded by America's game. Georgia? Lured in by NATO in 2008, it got war instead. Bombs raining down within months of joining. Europe's economy is on its knees now. Cut off from Russian trade, Nord Stream pipeline blown to bits by Ukrainian terrorists. Everyone knows who's behind that. America doesn't even hide it. The neocons don't even care. Europe's their playground, security. NATO promised it, but that's always been a lie. It's made Europe a target, not a shield. Russia's less safe too. Pushed into a corner, nuclear treaties gone, missiles on its doorstep. This isn't protection. It's a powder keg the U.S. keeps lighting over and over again. 1 million dead in Ukraine scream the truth. Pax Americana has backfired, and badly. That 1 inch wasn't just a line on a map. It was a great hope. A chance for a world where kids didn't have to grow up under war's shadow. Gorbachev and the Russian people risked everything for that hope. The U.S. took it and ran, chasing a fantasy of ruling the entire world alone. They didn't just betray Russia, they betrayed us all. Europe's now fracturing, Ukraine's dying, Russia's fighting. For what? A few more bases? A superpower's ego? 1 million more graves? Look at this legacy. Broken trust, broken homes, a broken world. Europe could have said no, kept NATO back, and kept peace alive. Instead, it marched behind America into the chaos. 1 million men, sons, fathers, brothers, they didn't need to die. Mothers didn't need to bury their kids. This is on the U.S. and NATO, their greed, their lies, and their blood-stained hands. So where do we go? Europe can still wake up, talk to Russia, rebuild what's left, and forge its own path. But it starts with the truth. America's promise was a sham. NATO's march wasn't safety, it was war bait. Those 1 million lives, they're the price of a superpower that doesn't know when to stop. We can't bring those people back. But we can fight for the next million. Demand peace, reject the lie. Because if we don't, who will?